Well, some say there is a war on men. Some say there isn't. Some say there is, but it's a good thing because we need to take those pesky men down a peg and perhaps the world would be a better place if they took a back seat for a while and let the women rule the world, as a popular pop song would have you believe they already do. Or run the world, excuse me. So, a filmmaker in the UK decided to find out, well, what are men good for? And she created the documentary titled The Abolition of Men. Her name is Jess Gill. She joins me right now here on the Aussie Wire. Jess, thank you so much for making time to come and chat with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honour.
Now, I've got a clip here. I want to open with this because it's quite a gobsmacking thing. This is from early on in your documentary. It's a fabulous documentary. We'll put the link in the description of this video. But here is a clip.
What are women good for?
Everything.
Everything.
What are men good for?
Nothing.
Do you think men are important in society?
Well, I guess
It's just painful.
I guess what traditionally defines men, you know, the traditionally masculine areas of what people do. I think some of that may be important in society, but I think it's probably been overly prioritized in society. Like, the masculine way of dealing with things is often more aggressive and more kind of, you know,
Do you think it's a bad thing?
I think it often is a bad thing. I think it can be a bad thing, and I think probably we need less of it. We need a somewhat more traditionally feminine approach to quite a lot of the problems we have in the world.
Wow, I'm really impressed that you kept your composure. That stuff frustrates me so much. Anyway, putting that aside, what was the inspiration for you to even be walking out there and asking these questions?
I thought it was just a generally interesting question, what are men good for? With my Vox Pop style questions, I do them quite frequently on the street in like more liberal areas like Shoreditch in London. And my tactic isn't really to like debate them. I want them to like dig their own graves. And if you just ask them the basic questions, because they have this idea of what to say in their head, which sounds good, but when they actually say it out loud, when they can't say, what are men good for? Men are good for a lot of things. Men are good for being protectors, being providers, building our entire society. When they can't say that, it says a lot about society. Or even saying, are men good? Like, if a man can't justify his own self-worth, like, I think it says a lot about society.
Well, that's what I find astonishing about that particular response that you captured there. Now, you were telling me off air that actually went viral and that became the catalyst for why you even made this documentary in the first place. So it's an awful lot of work to make a documentary. I know that firsthand. It's often unrewarding in the sense that you put it out there into the world and a certain number of people see it and then you kind of go, oh, okay, well now what? What's the experience been like for you and what's the reception been like to the work that you've created?
So this is actually my second documentary. It's completely me doing it pretty much. With Reason supports, like with equipment and also a filming person. Reason UK is the organisation that I make these videos with.
Yeah.
And the first one was actually about the gender critical movement in the UK. So, you know, Posey Parker, who has been attacked both verbally and physically by transgender activists. And in my first documentary, it was to expose the atrocities that these activists have been doing. And these are people who are seen as being on the right side of history by the media. They're constantly defended by the media. And I wanted to change that narrative because it was truly awful. These are just middle-aged women, you know, they're mums, they're sometimes lesbians, who just simply want their spaces and their daughters' spaces to be protected.
Yeah.
And you have these fully grown men attacking them, going up to these protests and basically slandering them. And it was the same kind of thing with the Abolition of Men documentary, in the sense that I wanted to expose this really awful narrative, and I'm not sure where exactly it's come from because I don't believe it was really inspired by like the Me Too movement. I think it was more underlying than that. I think in the effort to empower women, we've at the same time sort of got rid of the importance of men. Men are just simply, as Connor Tomlinson from podcast Load Seaters said in the documentary, they're simply castrated women pretty much, and that's such an awful thing in society. I think my approach with these documentaries is to go against the idea that facts don't care about your feelings. Facts are, of course, important, I think, and a lot of our discourse is surrounded by facts. Of course, our experiences are shaped by facts, and I think as conservatives we're a lot more fact-based than leftist. But we need to show how these things impact people. It's deeply saddening when a man can't say that he's important.
We do have a bit of a backlash happening at the moment, though, and we see that being expressed in some ways that are healthy, with many men and indeed many women returning to a sense of traditional masculinity and the desire to form families, which is the most basic unit of society, etc. But we also see it expressed in, this is my opinion here, in some unhealthy ways, with some men going for a genuinely aggressive form of hypermasculinity, a sense of dominance, and seeing that is the correct expression of masculinity. How is it that men in, let's take the UK where you're based, the young men that you see around you that are searching for meaning, that are searching for what is their role in a society that has widely rejected that there is such a thing as a role for them in society, how would they possibly be able to find their way?
I think it's incredibly tough for young men in particular because of multiple factors. Like, I think university has had a massive impact because basically, it's like Lord of the Flies. They're allowed to do whatever they want. They're allowed to sleep around. They're allowed to get drunk all the time. And all they have to do in return is complete a university essay every few weeks. And because of that, there's these perverse incentives that encourages this hedonistic lifestyle. And then on top of that, the sexual revolution is a massive thing. The sexual revolution has tricked women into believing that sleeping around is empowering, that it's something natural, that everyone should do that. It's just a part of the university experience, and it's discouraging this sort of nuclear family idea that we want to promote. I know multiple people who went to university, and because they went to university, they broke up with their girlfriends. In an alternate universe where Tony Blair didn't encourage so many people to go to university, these people would have probably stayed with their partner, got married, and had kids already. I think because of the push for university, because of the push for short-term relationships, to sleep around, this has encouraged men and women to go through this sort of sleeping around lifestyle, and that doesn't come with responsibility. I think something understated that we don't discuss enough is obviously women are impacted by hookup culture. That is oftentimes discussed because women feel used, but I don't think we talk about men being impacted by hookup culture and having short-term relationships. I think men need this sense of responsibility, and they need a sense of purpose. I think that's actually why the male suicide rate is so high, because men who have lost everything, they feel like that's the only solution. And in response to that, they're told to just talk it out, have a beer with their mates at the pub. That's not really a solution. That's a very feminine solution, not addressing the issue. And so you wonder why so many young men are going to people like Andrew Tate, who I'd admit has some good advice. Like, when I see him on my Instagram, he's a lot more different to how he's depicted in the mainstream media. For valid reasons and some unvalid reasons. The majority of the advice that he's given to young men isn't the awful advice that the media is depicting it as. Of course, I'm not saying he's not giving that advice. I'm saying the more mainstream advice that he's giving, the mainstream things that he's saying in these TikTok, Instagram reels, isn't just have sex with a load of women all the time. It's be a provider, be a protector, and I think that resonates with a lot of men, and he's taken up the role of someone like Jordan Peterson. I think men are craving some sort of fatherly figure, some sort of guidance, because our education system really doesn't push them. Society, again, if you ask what are men good for, they don't know. In all sorts of institutions, like the RAF, for example, in the UK, they discouraged white men from attending. The RAF, the army, is a core thing for men to go into. It's one of the main ways they can get purpose, and by these woke diversity quotas, they're discouraging that.
Well, Andrew Tate's not someone that I particularly like to talk about because I think he's been lionised for well, let me just say, I think there's a lot of things in his past that he's not being held accountable for at the moment, and I'll let the courts do that in Europe, and also people make their own judgments about some of what he's said in the past that remains unaddressed. I'm all for forgiveness, I'm all for second chances, I'm all for people learning, but I don't believe he's learnt from some of his worst mistakes. Having said that, you're absolutely right. When you do see a reel come across your feed and you just see that selected little bit of content, it is just direct advice that is actually oftentimes good advice to men, and something that is sorely lacking. So, Jess, take us out here with answering your own question. What are men good for?
I think, obviously, I like how you did the Uno reverse card there. That's quite funny. I think men are good for a lot of things. I think men and women are good for a lot of things. I think we need to define that oftentimes they're good for separate things. I think women are a lot more compassionate. I think men are a lot more, or at least should be a lot more stoic. I think in the way they treat things, it's a sense of responsibility. They really thrive on responsibility. I think look around you, most of the things built in your house, on your street, in the world have been built by men. I think there's been a lot of good leaders who are men, and I don't think, we necessarily need, like, I'm not saying we shouldn't have female leaders, but I think there have been so many strong leaders who are men and are good representatives of men, like Winston Churchill. Maybe not the current politicians. I don't think they're good examples, but in the traditional sense, definitely. And I think because of that lack of heroicism, the positive traits that men have just been sort of turned around. Like I said, they don't have that responsibility. And if you want to talk about like toxic masculinity has come about because of this denial of masculinity. Like, it's a good thing that men want to hold doors open for women. I think that should be an honourable thing, or that men want to pay for the dates. I think that should be something promoted, quite frankly. And because of that, because men aren't seen to be protecting women, when a woman comes forward being like, hey, this guy's done this awful thing to me, if he's been disrespectful to me, I think a lot of men don't have that protective aspect in the same way anymore. So it really comes back to women as well. Like, women need strong men. I think society needs strong men, and strong men need society to promote them.
Well, Jess Gill, thank you so much for making The Abolition of Men. We will put the link to your documentary in the description of this video so people can watch it for themselves. I do highly recommend it. It is illuminating, if at times, as you saw my reaction there, that clip that we showed, it is infuriating to watch how some people simply cannot or will not answer such a simple, straightforward question. But Jess Gill, thank you so much for making the doco and highlighting this issue, and thank you for joining us here on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you.